Hello, friends, and welcome to summer at St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the beautiful St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. St. Andrew is proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gostandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, service opportunities, and a host of summer events, you can visit our website or email us directly at connect@gostandrew.com. We'd love to hear from you. Just as a reminder, our full Sunday morning worship services, complete with music, prayer, announcements, liturgy, ministry spotlights, and the sermon, are live streamed on our YouTube page each week and permanently archived for viewing anytime. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gostandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?"
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Context matters here a lot. Where does your experience take you when you hear this verse? I remember the mother I held up with my body when I was a chaplain. The mother who had left her child, seemingly healthy, playing in her crib with the sitter that morning, only to hear the child had died of SIDS just 3 hours later. Outside of the ER room, eventually both of our bodies yielded to the weight of loss and slid to the floor where we wept. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I hear this scripture and I also go right back to the small counseling room, sitting across from a woman whose husband was missing, with her young adult kids and the crisis response team waiting in the lobby. I remember her shaking as she shuffled back to the counseling room. The emptiness in her eyes, me having to direct her to the chair. She was unable to process much of what was happening or to describe the events that led up to that day, other than to tell me what he had had for breakfast that morning and how she wished she had taken time to cook him eggs rather than insist he eat cereal. Her biggest regret of that moment. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I haven't taken a poll, but I am guessing that blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted may not always bring comfort to people holding on to the shards of life. And yet in those moments, whether we feel it or not, it's the promise of comfort that we come to cling to. a just enough crumb of hope to sustain us through the depth of suffering. People across faith traditions and spiritual practices, and even those on the edges of doubt and disbelief, want comfort. It's why we have prayers in the bulletin and a care ministry, because we hold hope for one another, even if we cannot quite claim it for ourselves. There are many people I've known on the edge of life. People who felt they lost the words to pray somewhere along the way, or felt that they weren't good enough with words or good enough people for any of it to matter. Many gave up talking with God, which is really all that prayer is. And still in their moment of need, those folks wanted to believe that comfort was coming and help was on the way. If you have ever watched someone you love ache in a way that no words can seem to touch, you know that comfort isn't like a spiritual Band-Aid or a magic wand that we can just wave around and suddenly, ta-da, things look and feel better. It doesn't work that way. And for the time we have together today, I'd like for us to agree that we will not take a mourning makes us stronger approach. Blessings are kind of strange. Where I grew up, bless your heart can mean a lot of different things based on who is speaking the words. You can't always tell the difference between a blessing and a curse. Yet the Gospel of Matthew gives a high priority to these blessings of Jesus, known as the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart, all of which we will be exploring over the next several weeks. The Beatitudes offer a language that speaks to the strange mix of awful and divine experience, the both and the multiple truths of the beautiful and messy part of our actual everyday reality and God's presence with us. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Dr. Alan Wolfelt is a death educator, clinician, and director of the Center for Loss and Life Transition in Fort Collins. His work and contribution to the field of thanatology shifted grief and mourning from a pathology to a treatment model based on simply being with those who mourn. He writes, "Our capacity to love requires the necessity to mourn. To deny the significance of mourning would be to believe that there is something wrong about loving, and our greatest gift from God is our capacity to love." Grief and mourning are a natural and normal response to loss, my friends, not a lack of faith. We grieve and mourn things and people that we love. As a pastor and a therapist, I've had the sacred privilege of walking alongside of many people during the worst times of their lives. When we face moments of trauma and tragedy, grief and loss, blessing is not usually where people start in describing their loss. Some may wonder when bad things happen or when they experience loss if they are being punished. This transactional way of looking at the Beatitudes, moving mourning from the loss side of the ledger to the gain side, asking those who suffer to view their hardships as blessing, is a big ask. But I don't think that's what's going on here. Psychologist and author John Welwood coined the term spiritual bypassing as a tendency to turn away from what is difficult, painful, or unpleasant, and to use spiritual ideas or beliefs to avoid or explain away pain. This isn't to say that faith or spirituality isn't also a protective factor in dealing with life's hardest moments and challenges. It is. But what can lead to spiritual bypassing And what we often do with the best of intentions as people of faith is to rush in and comfort those in mourning with words that sometimes do more harm than good. Phrases like, God needed another angel, or God has this, or just pray about it. All of those things might be true, and in moments of our deepest mourning, what is most needed is presence. To grieve with those who grieve, to mourn with those who mourn, we can simply be a witness without quick fixes. As tempting as it is to make blessed are those who mourn, reflect a God who will take away our mourning, this verse goes further than a platitude. We hear a commitment from Jesus that God will be with us in the midst of mourning and comfort will come. I take him at his word on this one. It is understandable to hear the Beatitudes through our own life experience, especially blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Grief is a shared and universal experience. No one is exempt. We want God to be present and near in our times of suffering. But there is an important distinction here that cannot be missed. Grief and mourning are two different things. Grief is the internal experience of loss and transition, and mourning is the outward expression of grief. So while we may find a personal comfort in a relational God, in this second beatitude, Jesus is speaking to mourning, the suffering beyond ourselves, the suffering in a world filled with injustice, exploitation, and violence. While we may include ourselves with those on the margins and identify as those who feel at times powerless and hopeless, the Beatitudes speak to a mourning incurred from the conditions in a world that is far from God's purposes, and the mourning of a God who also mourns injustice, exploitation, and violence. The gospel writer in Matthew is writing in a political context to a people who have been in exile, naming a shared collective mourning rather than an individual mourning we all face at one time or another. Echoing the Old Testament prophetic narratives of Micah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, prophets who lamented the condition of the world, Matthew suggests that we do not have to accept the current reality. So, what if Jesus really meant what he said? Imagine the scene. A large crowd of marginalized people, the sick, the paralyzed, the oppressed, the formerly incarcerated, the addicted, the poor. Along with Jesus' disciples stood the curious, the skeptics, the doubters. They were all there, gathered around Jesus. And Jesus looks out across this crowd with love and compassion. To those people who had been beaten up and kept down by society, Jesus looked at them, directly at them, and said, "They are blessed. You are blessed." And then he says to us, he says, when we see the situation in which people are in, the injustices that they have faced, and it breaks our hearts and it causes us to mourn, that we too are blessed. Now, you may have heard the words, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justice now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." Many of us understand how to show up for people in their individual times of grief. But it's much harder for us to think about how to truly show up for and be in solidarity with those who mourn collectively. How do we not become paralyzed by the amount of suffering in this world? Where do we start? How can we even know what to do when there is so much suffering all around us? I think that it's significant that in Judaism, that to say Kaddish, the prayer ritual that mourners recite during the bereavement period, and to mark the anniversary of a death of a loved one, that there must be at least 10 people present because mourning is understood to be a communal experience. No one stands alone. No one mourns alone. Comfort comes through the community. I've spent a good deal of time this week reflecting on what mourning, again, mourning as the outward expression of grief, looks like in solidarity with others. Cornel West famously said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." But I've wondered and thought about where I have been a part of mourning in public spaces. Not in a performative or hollow way, but in places where violence has rocked community and communities have been transformed. Places where the community came together to express mourning and collective grief and then to act. I'm recalling a place I know well in Baltimore, a community memorial garden built in memory of people murdered with guns in a city with more than 300 shootings every year. Annually, moms, children, widows, neighbors gather to paint rocks and collectively grieve and remember and organize to move forward and keep kids safe. Maybe it's the 9/11 memorial or just down the road here at Columbine or Mother Emanuel AME Church that come to mind for you. What these spaces share is more than a sum of individual memory and grief, but collective mourning, lament, and solidarity. Admittedly, up until a few days ago, I had been thinking of other places, not St. Andrew United Methodist Church. But now my heart is here with you and those who are on the edges of our community and beyond our walls. On Thursday of this week, our space was violated. Our pride banner and patio were vandalized in a hateful and harmful act of aggression against our witness and our welcome. This is no means the first time that St. Andrew has experienced the cost of being a voice for justice. Our commitment remains to be a church where all are welcome and to invite others to experience the love and grace of God, which is more than just a slogan, more than what we say on a Sunday morning or what we put on a banner. Our welcome is what we seek to embody as a community. Our welcome is why we serve our neighbors, why we embrace immigrants who are new in our community, host families experiencing homelessness, and feed our neighbors. It's why we started a social justice council to align our faith and action, teach anti-racism classes, and celebrate with our LGBTQ plus siblings for Pride Month. Today we mourn, tomorrow we act. We are comforted by a loving God and act as children of God who seek to transform hate with love and find strength in the solidarity of our community. One of the most helpful things any of us can have in the midst of suffering is the solidarity and support of those who wish they could say or do more. There is also comfort in the presence and solidarity of those who have suffered themselves and who have a particular ability to listen from their own experience. You should know there have been incredible acts of solidarity in the kindness of strangers who have shown up and scrubbed our sidewalks and sent messages of support. One person said to me, "The harmful action of one person will never drown out the good things happening here." Another person from Castle Rock stopped by with her kid. She attends a Lutheran church going through the reconciling process and came to our ally class last week to learn. She showed up to mourn, to act, to scrub away the harm and replace it with love. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. My friends, God is with us, and not just with us here. God is with all who mourn. There may be days when all we can do is mourn the acts of hatred and oppression that occur in the world around us. Each mass shooting, each harmful piece of dehumanizing legislation, each hateful word, act, and comment, each of which can leave us feeling overwhelmed, jaded, and doubtful in our ability to confront the challenges before us. But we mourn in community. We mourn and then we act. This is the work of welcoming. It's never done. This is the time. The Beatitudes give us the audacity to hope that words like mercy, peace, and love are more than descriptives of a one-day world. We can choose to act, to mourn, to be in solidarity. It is our hope that allows us to take steps forward as those who hunger for a better world. St. Andrew, we mourn as a community. No one is alone. May we find comfort in a God who welcomes all. May we be known by how we love. May we be known by how we welcome. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Our takeaways for today. Our capacity to love requires the necessity to mourn. Grief and mourning are two different things. And in the paradox of mourning, we find the audacity to hope and the comfort of a God who is with us. Take good care.